Hey everyone, this is Sandy from Sewing with Sandy, and I thought I would share with you just briefly what I do with the scraps when I'm finished with a project. I've been working on Violet Crafts elephant pattern for quite a while now, paper pieced, and I have a lot of these scraps that are odd sizes, weird shapes that were left over from the project itself. And rather than just throw those into a bin, which would pretty much guarantee that I would never bother to use them again, I have my scrap saving system. Now, most of these are too small to bother cutting into strips. I don't really cut into my strip saver unless I have at least 12 inches. And so these will all turn into squares. So I have, for my square sizes, I have 1.5 inch, 2 inch, 3.5, 5, and of course the most popular size, which is 2.5. So once I got all of my paper piecing done this afternoon, I had the option of finishing up that quilt with the last few seams, or sitting here visiting with my daughter and cutting up my scraps into the sizes for my scrap saver system. So I've got here, you can see I've got a really good stack of 1.5s because those pieces are pretty small that are left over. I've got 2s, 2.5s, and 3.5s. I didn't have any scraps big enough to cut 5s that weren't big enough to just save for something else. So just these few pieces of 5s are left. So the way that I do this is I will get my piece of fabric, and so here's one for example. If I can figure out the selvage or a straight cut that I used, which way the grain runs, that's really nice. If I can't, I don't worry too much about it because these are really small squares and the bias isn't going to be a huge problem. So here's an example. I would start by just zipping off that selvage, and then I would look at what was left, and you can kind of see I've got my ruler here, and really it looks like once that selvage is gone, it looks like the best use of this fabric is going to be 1.5 inches. You can see down here that 2 is coming off. Sorry about my nasty nails. It's not super great having everything closed, so ignore that. So I've got my 1.5. So the next thing I'd do after I get my selvage off is I'd flip my ruler around and I'd cut my 1.5. Then I would take my ruler and I'd make as many 1.5 inch squares as I could get out of this piece, and then that piece would be done. Now I've got a bigger piece here. Here's a bigger piece of my elephant fabric. So this piece, it looks like once I get my selvage off, I might be able to get a 5 inch square. So I'm gonna look, I'm gonna count 1, 2, 3, 4, nope, no 5 inch square. So the next size down, remember I'm always cutting the biggest possible denominator, is gonna be 3.5. So I'm gonna cut a 3.5 inch. Once my selvage is gone from this side, I'm gonna flip my ruler around, fit my mat. I've got my rotating mat, which is awesome for this task. Love this mat. Buy the biggest one you can afford because these are fabulous. This one is 17 inches square, and it's great. So I'm gonna flip my rotating mat around. I'm gonna cut a 3.5 inch strip, and I'm going to then cut as many 3.5 inch squares out of that as I can. Then what I have left over, so this is gonna come over here, 1, 2, 3.5 inches roughly. What I'm gonna have left over is gonna be kind of this weird shape. I'm gonna create, I'll have a straight cut here because I will have cut my 3.5. I'm gonna create another straight cut using that as a guide. And then I'm just gonna use my ruler in this space here to get either a 1.5 or 2 inch square. Same thing in this square up here. Again, trying to make sure that I'm keeping it straight with the selvage if I can, which on this piece, obviously I can do. Now, let's say I've got this triangle piece here. I can tell on this batik that this is the selvage. So again, I'm going to cut that selvage off, and probably on this piece, I'm going to be able to get my biggest piece after the selvage is gone is going to be a 2-inch square. So I'm going to cut that 2-inch square out. Now, if it's big enough, maybe I could get a 1.5 over here. Maybe I could get a 1.5 up here, but in this particular case, no. So I'm going to get that 2, and then these are going to go in the trash. I mean, I like to save when I can, but I'm not, you know, I'm not too crazy. So if I can't get at least a 1.5-inch square, it goes in the trash. So once this is done, once this pile is gone, this is the last of what I have left. I'll put all of those squares into their bins, and you can kind of see here what's in the bins right now is not a lot. There's actually a strip in this 3.5-inch bin, needs cut. And these are 5-inch squares. So some of these actually are charm packs that I've put in here. And some of them are scraps that I've put in here. So when I go to do a scrap quilt, whether it's a Bonnie Hunter pattern or any other kind of a scrap quilt, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my Scrap Saver system, and I'm going to find the squares and the strips that are the size that I need. I'm going to sort them by color for the scrap quilt, and then I will evaluate what I need to get as far as my going into my fat quarters or my yardage to go ahead and finish out that quilt. By doing that, I use a lot more of my scraps and I save money. So that's best to do, I believe, right when you finish the quilt. If you throw it into a pile or into a bin or into something and think you're going to get to it later, you really won't. I have found that to be true for myself. I just don't ever make the time to do it. The only exception to that might be if you're going to like a sewing afternoon with friends, you don't feel like dragging your sewing machine along. You bring your cutting mat, your cutter, and that bin of scraps and a little mini iron, and you've got an activity you can do all afternoon. You can sit and visit with your friends, not have to think about a pattern, not have to drag your sewing machine. And that's also another really great way to take care of your scraps. That's it. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.